Eh, bonjour mes élèves, aujourd'hui on va parler des adjectifs possessifs. C'est la première partie de 2 vidéos sur le sujet. So, this is Madam Brown. Today we're going to talk about possessive adjectives en français, of course. This is the first part of 2 videos. Possessive adjectives clarify ownership of an object. So in English, they are my, your, his, her, its, our, and their. French possessive adjectives. Here's a table of the possessive adjectives in French that you'll need to learn how to use. It looks pretty complicated because it kind of is. So for this video, we're just going to focus on the left half of the table, which is composed of mon, ma, mes, ton, ta, tes, and son, sa, ses. French possessive adjectives have 4 basic rules. First rule is owner agreement. The owner of the object will determine from which group of the possessive adjectives you should choose. The second rule, number agreement. The possessive adjective must agree in number, be it singular or plural, of the noun it modifies. Rule number 3, gender agreement. The possessive adjective needs to agree in gender with the noun it modifies, not the owner. And then rule number 4, one exception, feminine singular nouns that begin with a vowel or a silent H will take the masculine singular possessive adjective. That's a mouthful. So maybe after the video, you'll understand it a little better. Rule number 1, owner agreement. The possessive adjective that you choose will first depend on the owner. So let's look at our subject pronouns. There are 9 of them in French. So the first one being je is our first person singular pronoun. Tu is second person singular, but it's informal. Remember, vous can also be second person singular, but in a formal context. Third person singular, we have il, elle, and on, which can arguably sometimes be first person and even be third person plural. And then we have nous, which is first person plural. That means we, and then we have vous again, which can be second person plural. So that's all of y'all, as we like to say in Texas. And then we have third person plural, il and elle, but they have an S at the end, even though we don't pronounce it. Okay, so the possessive adjectives that go with je are mon, ma, mes. They all mean my, but they are used for different reasons. For tu, we look at ton, ta, tes. These are your things. Il, elle, and on. For those 3 subject pronouns, we use son, sa, and ses. They could mean his, her, one's, or its. In some contexts, it could even mean our, but let's not get into that. It's just because on can sometimes be used to mean we. And then looking at nous, first person plural, our possessive adjectives are notre and nos. Looking at vous, our possessive adjectives are votre and vos. And for il and elle plural, our possessive adjectives are leur and, get this, leur. They're pronounced exactly the same, but the second one gets an S at the end because it's plural. Hopefully that will make more sense in the second video when we talk about those. All right, rule number 2, number agreement. The possessive adjective will also vary depending on whether the owned object is singular or plural. So it doesn't matter about whom owns the object, it's about the object itself. Do I own more than one object? So if it's singular, we only look at using mon, ma, ton, ta, son, sa, notre, votre, or leur sans S, leur without an S. If it's plural, then we look at using mes, tes, ses, nos, vos, and leur. Now notice all of those end with an S, but we don't pronounce the S. Rule number 3, gender agreement. Gender agreement only matters if the owned object is singular and the owner is singular. So if the object is singular, we only look at mon, ma, ton, ta, son, sa, notre, votre, leur. We can cross out those bottom ones. Now, if the owner is singular, then we look at mon, ma, ton, ta, son, sa. So notice in the bottom, we crossed out notre, votre, and leur because gender doesn't matter on those. So if it's a masculine singular object that I own, that you own, that he or she owns, we use mon, ton, or son. If it is feminine singular, then we look at using ma, ta, or sa. Now there's one last rule, just to make it a little more complicated for you. There's one exception. If the owned feminine singular object begins with a vowel or a silent H, you will use the masculine singular possessive adjective, which is mon, ton, and son. So feminine singular, but it starts with a vowel or a silent H. You can't use ma, ta, or sa because the French don't like to have two vowels side by side. Okay, so let's examine how that looks in practice. We'll begin by answering some key questions first. Rule number 1, who owns the object? Owner agreement. Let's say I own the object. So we'll look at je. So the possessive adjectives we're going to look at are mon, ma, and mes. We can ignore the rest for now. Rule number 2, number agreement. Is the object that I own singular or plural? If it's singular, then I only need to focus on using mon or ma. If it's plural, then I need to look at using mes. Rule number 3, gender agreement. Is the singular object masculine or feminine? So we don't need to worry about plural right now. Plural, gender doesn't matter. But if it's a singular object that I own, if it's masculine, I'm going to use mon. If it's feminine, I'm going to use ma. Rule number 4, that one exception. If it's a feminine singular object, does it begin with a vowel or silent H? If the answer is yes, then I have to use the masculine singular possessive adjective. I can't use ma because we can't have two vowels side by side. All right, now we'll look at 5 different nouns to see how this looks in practice. We'll still need to ask the same questions again. So, owner agreement. Who owns the object? Let's say I do. So we're going to use the possessive adjective my, which in French is mon, ma, or mes. Now, number agreement. I've got 5 nouns over there on the left. 3 of them are singular, 2 of them are plural. So is the object singular or plural? If the object is singular, I could use mon or ma. So we can cross out mes. If it's plural, I only focus on using mes. I don't need to worry about mon or ma. So we cross those off the list. Rule number 3, gender agreement. Now this doesn't matter for mes, right? The plural ones. So we can just leave those alone. We can ignore them. Just looking at mon or ma. Is the singular object masculine or feminine? If the object is masculine, as in the case of père, father, we're not going to use ma, we're going to use mon. If it's feminine, as in mère, mother, or ami, which in this case is feminine, it has an extra e at the end, we're going to use ma. We wouldn't use mon. However, there's one exception. Rule number 4. Does the singular feminine object begin with a vowel or a silent H? In the case of ami, the answer is yes. It does begin with a vowel. So we can't use ma. We have to use mon. So we have mon ami instead of ma ami. All right, the same rules apply to other possessive adjectives. Let's take a look. So, rule number 1, owner agreement. Who owns the object? You do. Your. Now we're talking in informal text, which is tu. So our options are ton, ta, and te. Number agreement. Rule number 2, is the object singular or plural? If it's singular, we can only use ton or ta. If it's plural, we only use te. Rule number 3, gender agreement. Is the singular object masculine or feminine? If it's masculine, as in the case of père, we use ton. If it's feminine, as in mère, we use ta. And then our final exception, does a singular feminine object begin with a vowel or a silent H? In the case of ami, we use ton. We can't use ta. All right, let's go through the next one. Rule number 1, owner agreement. Who owns the object? He does, she does, it does, one does. That's his, her, its, or one's. In those cases, we would use son, sa, or ses. So, rule number 2, number agreement is the object that is owned singular or plural. If it's singular, we use son or sa. If it's plural, we use ses. Gender agreement is the singular object, right? We don't need to worry about the plural objects anymore. They've got ses. But if it's a singular object that is owned, is it masculine or is it feminine? If it's masculine, we're going to use son. If it's feminine, we're going to use sa. But then that one last exception, does a singular feminine object begin with a vowel or a silent H? In the case of ami, it is feminine, but it begins with a vowel, so we use son. All right, pratiquer, time to practice. Look at these nouns in a table and decide, based on the criteria, which possessive adjective they would use. Okay, it's a big table, but try not to freak out. Can you figure out which possessive adjective to use for these nouns on the left? So we have oncle, tante, ami, feminine, cousine, also feminine, sœur, feminine, and enfant, which is masculine. But remember, just because it's masculine doesn't mean that they are all male children. It could be a mixed group of children as well. When it's a mixed group, the French default to the masculine. Okay, our owners are je, tu, il, and elle. So looking at the first one, oncle, who's the owner? Je, I am the owner. It is my uncle. So the possessive adjectives that I could use are mon, ma, or mes. It's a singular object, so I can only use mon or ma. It's a masculine object, so I can only use mon. Therefore, we end up with mon oncle, my uncle. Looking at tante, a feminine singular object owned by tu, which is you, informal. The possessive adjectives I can choose from are ton, ta, and te. Because it's a singular owned object, I can only use ton or ta. It's a feminine object, so I'm going to use ta. And then we end up with ta tante, your aunt. Looking at ami, a feminine singular noun. The owner is il, as in he. Possessive adjectives that we could use are son, sa, and ses. Singular owned objects, so we can only use son or sa. Looking across, it starts with a vowel, so we can only use son, and we end up with son ami. Now, this could be his friend, who's female, or his girlfriend. Now, looking at cousine, it is plural, it has an S at the end. It's also feminine, it has an extra E in there. The owner is je, I. They are my cousins. So the possessive adjectives I could use are mon, ma, or mes. Because it's plural, the only choice I have is mes. So we end up with mes cousines, my cousins. Looking at sœur, it's a plural. For sisters, it's feminine. The owner is tu, as in you, in an informal sense. My only possessive adjectives that I could use are ton, ta, and te. Because the object being owned is plural, we use te. And so we end up with tes sœurs, your sisters. And then finally, looking at enfant, the children, who is the owner? She, elle. So with elle, we can only use son, sa, or ses. She owns the children. They are her children. Because it's plural, we use ses enfants. Normally, we don't say the S at the end of ses, but because it's followed by a vowel, it makes a Z sound. So ses enfants, her children. Alors, that's it for now, but that was only the first part. In the second video, we look at the other half of the table. So I look forward to seeing you again next time. À la prochaine. Au revoir.